Sarah, when you first saw that mansion, what went through your mind?
Honestly, Tony, I thought I was dreaming. Here I was, 7 months pregnant, sleeping in my car, and suddenly I'm holding keys to this massive Victorian house. I remember standing on that wraparound porch, my hand on my belly, thinking maybe the universe finally threw me a lifeline. The paint was peeling, windows were boarded up, but it was mine, free and clear. I actually cried tears of joy that first night, sleeping on an actual floor instead of cramped car seats. But now, knowing what I know about the others who came before me, about what really happened in those rooms, I wish I'd never answered that phone call. I wish I'd never stepped foot inside.
Sarah, what did you discover about the 7 previous winners that made you realize you weren't lucky? You were chosen.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Sarah, before we dive deeper into what you found inside that mansion, I think our listeners need to understand how you ended up in that situation in the first place. You were 22, pregnant, and homeless when you received that call about winning a contest you never entered. Can you paint us a picture of what your life looked like in those weeks leading up to that phone call?
Long pause, those were the darkest days of my life, Tony. I was about 4 months along, just starting to show, and I'd been sleeping in my car for nearly 3 weeks. It was October and the nights were getting cold. I remember waking up every morning with frost on the windows and this gnawing fear that someone would see me there, parked behind the 24-hour laundromat on Elm Street.
What led to you being in that situation? If you're comfortable sharing, of course.
My landlord had evicted me when I couldn't make rent. I was working part-time at a diner, but morning sickness had me calling in sick too often, and they cut my hours. The father of my baby had disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. No family to speak of, really. My mother died when I was 19, and I never knew my father. I kept thinking about what would happen when the baby came, where we'd go.
That must have been terrifying, especially being responsible for another life growing inside you.
Every night, I'd put my hand on my belly and promise this little one that I'd figure something out. I'd drive around looking at houses with warm lights in the windows, families gathered around dinner tables, and I'd wonder if I'd ever be able to give my child that kind of safety. The irony is, I was always drawn to the older neighborhoods, the Victorian houses with their wraparound porches and bay windows. There was something about them that felt like home, even though I'd never lived in anything like that.
Interesting that you mentioned Victorian houses specifically. Looking back now, does that seem significant to you?
Pause. It does, Tony. It's like there was this invisible thread pulling me toward that architectural style, that time period. I'd find myself taking detours through the historic district, slowing down in front of the grand old houses that had been converted to apartments or offices. There was one house in particular, a pale yellow Queen Anne with intricate gingerbread trim, and I must have driven past it 20 times. I even parked there once and just sat looking at it, imagining what it would be like to climb those front steps and turn a key in that heavy wooden door.
Tell me about the day you received the call about winning the mansion. What was going through your mind?
I was sitting in the parking lot of the public library, using their Wi-Fi to search for jobs on my phone. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cold and drizzly. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. When I did pick up, this woman's voice said, "Congratulations, Sarah Martinez, you've won our grand prize." I thought it was a scam at first.
What convinced you it was legitimate?
She knew details about me that seemed impossible for a scammer to have. My full name, my mother's maiden name, even the fact that I was pregnant. She said I'd won a fully restored Victorian mansion in Millbrook, about an hour north of where I was living. When I told her I'd never entered any contest, she laughed and said sometimes fate enters us in contests we don't even know about.
That's a chilling phrase, looking back. How did she describe the house?
She called it the Hartwell Estate. Said it was an 18 to 75 Gothic revival mansion that had been recently renovated. She described the wraparound porch, the tower room, the original hardwood floors. Tony, as she was talking, I could picture every detail she mentioned, like I'd seen it before in dreams. She said the house had been waiting for the right family, someone who would appreciate its history and character.
Did you ask any questions about the contest itself or the organization running it?
I was so overwhelmed by the possibility of having a real home for my baby that I didn't think to ask the right questions. She said it was sponsored by the Millbrook Historical Preservation Society and that all the paperwork would be handled by their legal team. She gave me an address and told me the keys would be waiting under a loose stone on the front porch, said I could move in immediately.
What was your first impression when you drove up to the house?
Long pause. It took my breath away, Tony. The house sat on about 2 acres, surrounded by old oak and maple trees that were just starting to turn colors. It was 3 stories of dark gray stone and timber, with these beautiful Gothic arched windows and a tower that rose up on the left side like something from a fairy tale. The wraparound porch had intricate carved details, and there were bay windows that jutted out from what looked like a library or sitting room.
It sounds magnificent, but I'm hearing something in your voice that suggests your feelings about it were complicated from the start.
Even in that first moment of wonder, there was something that made me uneasy. The house felt too perfect, too much like something I'd dreamed of my entire life. And it was so quiet, Tony. No birds singing, no sounds of traffic or neighbors. Just this heavy silence that seemed to press against the car windows. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes before I worked up the courage to get out.
Tell me about finding the keys and entering the house for the first time.
The loose stone was exactly where she said it would be, to the right of the front steps. The keys were in a small envelope with my name written on it in this old-fashioned handwriting. When I slid the key into the lock, it turned so smoothly, like it had been waiting for me. The front door opened into a grand foyer with a staircase that curved up to the second floor. There was a crystal chandelier hanging from a ceiling that must have been 12 feet high.
How did the house smell? Sometimes scent is our strongest memory trigger.
That's such a good question, Tony. It smelled like lemon oil and old wood, with just a hint of something floral, like dried roses. But underneath that was something else. Something that reminded me of the way my mother's jewelry box smelled when I was little. Metallic and sweet at the same time. The house felt lived in, but also empty, if that makes sense.
Were there any personal belongings left behind? Any clues about previous occupants?
That's what struck me as so odd. The house was fully furnished, beautifully furnished, but there were no personal items anywhere. No photographs, no books with inscriptions, no forgotten coffee cups or mail on the counter. It was like someone had created the perfect idea of a home but had removed every trace of the people who might have lived there.
You mentioned the house was described as recently renovated. What condition was everything in?
Everything was pristine, Tony. The hardwood floors gleamed like they'd just been polished. The kitchen had been updated with modern appliances that were somehow designed to look period-appropriate. All the plumbing worked perfectly. The electricity was on. Even the phone line was connected. There were fresh linens on the beds and food in the pantry, canned goods mostly, but also fresh milk and eggs in the refrigerator.
That must have felt like a miracle after sleeping in your car.
It did, but it also felt surreal. I kept waiting for someone to knock on the door and tell me there'd been a mistake. I walked through every room on the first floor that day, just touching things to make sure they were real. There was a library with built-in shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with books about local history, gardening, child-rearing, a dining room with a table that could seat 12, a parlor with a fireplace surrounded by hand-painted tiles.
Which room called to you the most?
The tower room on the second floor. You had to climb a narrow spiral staircase to reach it, and when you got to the top, you were surrounded by windows on 3 sides. You could see for miles, across rolling hills and patches of forest. Someone had set it up as a nursery, Tony. There was a white crib, a rocking chair, shelves lined with children's books, a mobile hanging over the crib with little wooden animals.
How did that make you feel, seeing a nursery already prepared?
Pause. It should have felt like a blessing, but instead it sent chills down my spine. It was too perfect, too much of a coincidence. Who sets up a nursery in a house that's supposed to be a prize in a random contest? And the mobile, when a breeze came through one of the windows, it would turn slowly and play this lullaby. I recognized the tune, but I couldn't place where I'd heard it before.
Did you stay in the house that first night?
I did, but I barely slept. I kept hearing sounds, footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing. When I'd get up to investigate, everything would be silent and still. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noise. But there was something about the quality of the sounds, the rhythm of the footsteps. They sounded purposeful, like someone was checking on things, making sure everything was in order.
Were you still in contact with whoever had called you about winning the house?
I tried calling the number back the next day, but it was disconnected. I drove into Millbrook to find the Historical Preservation Society, but when I asked around, no one had heard of it. The address they'd given me for their office turned out to be an empty storefront that looked like it had been vacant for months.
That must have been alarming. What did you decide to do?
I was torn between fear and desperation, Tony. On one hand, something was clearly not right about the whole situation. On the other hand, I was pregnant and homeless. And this house was offering me and my baby a chance at a real life. I decided to stay, at least until I could figure out what was really going on. I thought maybe if I was careful, if I stayed alert, I could make it work.
Looking back now, do you think that was the reaction they were counting on?
Long pause. Yes, I do. I think whoever orchestrated this knew exactly how desperate I was, knew that I'd be willing to overlook red flags in exchange for security. They counted on my maternal instincts overriding my sense of caution, and for a while, it worked. I spent the next few days just trying to settle in, trying to convince myself that I'd somehow gotten incredibly lucky.
But something changed your mind about that luck, didn't it?
It did, Tony. It was about a week after I'd moved in when I found the first letter. I was cleaning out the desk in the library, thinking I should make space for my own things, when I discovered a hidden drawer. Inside was a stack of letters, all addressed to previous contest winners. 7 letters, 7 different names, 7 different stories. But when I read them, I realized they were all women like me. Young, pregnant, alone, desperate for a new start.
What did these letters reveal?
Each letter was from someone who called herself their benefactor, welcoming them to their new home and explaining how special their unborn children were going to be, how the house had been waiting for them, how their babies would be part of something important and historic. The letters were dated over the past 15 years, Tony, and when I searched online for the names of these women, I found missing person reports for every single one of them.
Sarah, when you first laid eyes on that mansion, what went through your mind? I imagine it wasn't quite what you'd pictured when they told you about your prize.
Long pause. Oh, Tony, you have to understand. I'd been living in my car for 3 weeks at that point, 5 months pregnant and running on fumes. When I pulled up to that address on Willowbrook Street, I thought I'd made a mistake. The place looked like something out of a Gothic novel.
Paint me a picture of what you saw that first day.
The Victorian was massive, 3 stories of peeling gray paint and broken shutters. Ivy had claimed the entire east wall, creeping up like gnarled fingers. The wraparound porch sagged in places, and several of the spindles were missing or hanging loose. But the windows, Tony, the windows were what struck me most.
What about them?
They were these tall, arched things with stained glass panels at the top. Even through all that grime and neglect, you could see hints of deep blues and emerald greens, like jewels buried under decades of dust. Some were boarded up, others had curtains drawn so tight you couldn't see an inch inside.
And you were supposed to just walk into this place and call it home?
That's exactly what I was thinking. The property lawyer, he'd met me at the gate with this heavy iron key ring. Must have had 20 keys on it, all different shapes and sizes. He kept apologizing, saying the estate hadn't had proper maintenance in years.
Years? How long had the mansion been empty?
According to him, the last owner passed in 2018. But when I pressed him about it, he got evasive, started talking about legal complications and estate disputes. Said the radio station had worked out some arrangement with the family to use it as a contest prize.
Did that explanation sit right with you?
Not for a second. I mean, what family gives away a mansion, even a rundown one, for a radio contest? And Tony, this wasn't just any radio contest. I never even entered the thing.
Walk me through how you supposedly won this place.
I was sitting in the prenatal clinic waiting room reading some old magazine about celebrity babies when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I was desperate for any kind of work call, so I answered. This cheerful woman's voice says, "Congratulations, Sarah Martinez. You've won our dream home giveaway."
Just like that?
Just like that. I told her she had the wrong person, that I'd never entered any contest. She laughed and said that was a common reaction, that sometimes friends or family enter on your behalf. Then she rattled off my full name, my phone number, even my current address.
Which was?
A shelter on the south side of town. Tony, nobody knew I was staying there except the intake coordinator and my caseworker. I'd been too ashamed to tell anyone else.
So this stranger on the phone knew details about your life that virtually no one else did.
Exactly. And when I asked her who had entered me in the contest, she said the entry was anonymous. A good Samaritan, she called it. Someone who wanted to help a young mother in need.
Looking back now, Sarah, what does your gut tell you about that phone call?
Pause. That I was being watched, Tony. That someone had been keeping track of my movements, my situation, maybe for longer than I want to think about.
Tell me about the neighborhood around the mansion. What kind of area was this?
That's another thing that felt off. Willowbrook Street was this quiet, tree-lined road with beautiful old homes. Not mansions like mine, but well-maintained colonials and craftsmen with manicured lawns and flower boxes. The kind of neighborhood where people drive luxury cars and have garden parties.
And your mansion?
Stuck out like a sore thumb. This decaying monument surrounded by prosperity. I remember walking up that front path, stepping around broken flagstones and overgrown weeds while the neighbors' properties looked like something from a home and garden magazine.
Did you meet any of these neighbors that first day?
I saw a few people. An older woman across the street was watering her roses, but when she noticed me looking, she quickly went inside. A man jogging by actually crossed to the other side of the road when he saw me at the gate. Like the place had some kind of reputation.
What was it like inside once you finally got the door open?
The front hallway was enormous, with this grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. The banister was solid mahogany, though it needed refinishing. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light coming through those stained glass windows I mentioned. But underneath the neglect, Tony, you could see the bones of something magnificent.
It sounds almost romantic when you describe it that way.
In daylight, with hope in my heart and a baby on the way, it felt like a fairy tale. But there were details that should have warned me. The way certain doors were locked with no keys to match, cold spots in rooms that should have been warm, and the smell.
What kind of smell?
Not mustiness or mold like you'd expect in an abandoned house. Something sweeter, almost floral, but with an undertone that made my stomach turn. I was pregnant, so I thought maybe it was just my heightened senses. But it seemed strongest near the back of the house, toward what I later learned was the servants' staircase.
Did you explore the entire house that first day?
I tried to, but like I said, several rooms were locked up tight. The lawyer claimed he didn't have keys for those areas, said they were probably storage rooms or spaces that weren't safe structurally. He seemed eager to leave, kept checking his watch and mentioning another appointment.
So he just left you there alone in this massive, partially accessible mansion?
Handed me the keys, pointed out where the main electrical panel was, and reminded me that utilities would be turned on within a few days. Oh, and he gave me this thick folder of paperwork. Legal documents, property surveys, maintenance records going back decades.
Did you read through all of that?
Not right away. I was more focused on finding a comfortable place to sleep and figuring out which rooms were livable. But later that week, when I started going through those papers, I found something interesting.
What was it?
A list of previous contest winners. 7 names, going back to 2019. Each one had supposedly won the mansion for a year-long stay, just like me.
7 people before you had won the same prize?
According to the paperwork, yes. But here's the thing, Tony. I tried looking up those names online, reaching out through social media, even called a few numbers I found. Not one of them responded. It was like they'd vanished into thin air.
So, Sarah, you mentioned earlier that winning this mansion felt like a miracle at first. Can you paint a picture for our listeners of what your life was like in those days leading up to that phone call?
Deep breath, Tony. I was sleeping in my car most nights. A beat-up Honda Civic with a broken passenger window I'd covered with plastic and duct tape. I was about 4 months along then, just starting to show, and every morning I'd wake up with my back screaming and my feet so swollen I could barely get my shoes on.
That must have been incredibly frightening, especially being pregnant.
The fear was constant. I'd park behind different gas stations each night, trying to stay invisible. There was this one attendant at a Shell station on Maple Street, an older woman with kind eyes who'd let me use the bathroom to clean up in the mornings. She never asked questions, just handed me paper towels and sometimes a cup of coffee.
What about family, Sarah? Was there no one you could turn to?
My grandmother had passed 6 months before. She'd raised me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 8. The state took the house to pay for her medical bills, and I was working 2 part-time jobs just to afford a studio apartment. When I lost both jobs because of morning sickness, well, everything just crumbled.
And then came this phone call about winning a mansion.
It was surreal, Tony. I was sitting in the parking lot of a McDonald's using their Wi-Fi to apply for jobs on my phone when it rang. This cheerful woman's voice saying I'd won the Blackwood estate in a contest I'd never heard of. At first, I thought it was some kind of scam.
The Blackwood estate. Tell us about your first impression when you actually saw the place.
Long pause. It was like stepping into a Gothic novel. This massive Victorian house, 3 stories tall with towers and wraparound porches. But everything was wrong. The paint was peeling in long strips, hanging like dead skin. Windows were boarded up or broken. There were these gargoyles on the corners of the roof, and I swear they seemed to be watching me.
You mentioned the woman who called you was cheerful. Did that seem odd, given what you were walking into?
Everything about it felt off. But I was so desperate, Tony. When you're homeless and pregnant, you don't question good fortune too closely. The woman, she said her name was Miss Hartley, met me at the front gate with this big smile and these papers to sign. She had this way of talking that made everything sound perfectly normal.
What did Miss Hartley tell you about the house's history?
She was vague, said it had been in the Blackwood family for generations, but they'd moved on. She mentioned it needed work, called it a fixer-upper with character. But there was something about how she wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she talked about the previous owners.
You've lived there for several weeks now. How would you describe the atmosphere inside?
The house feels alive, Tony, but not in a good way. There are sounds at night, footsteps in the halls when I'm the only one there. Doors that I close will be standing open in the morning. And the cold spots. Even on warm days, there are places in that house where the temperature drops 20 degrees for no reason.
That must be unsettling, especially being alone.
The loneliness is the worst part. It's this oppressive silence during the day, broken only by the house settling or the wind rattling those loose shutters. I've started talking to the baby just to hear a human voice. Sometimes I catch myself having full conversations, telling her about my day, about my grandmother.
Her.
Soft laugh. I don't know yet, but I have this feeling. Call it mother's intuition. My grandmother always said women in our family had strong instincts.
Speaking of your grandmother, have you found anything in the house that reminds you of family, of home?
That's the strange thing, Tony. In the master bedroom, there's this antique rocking chair that looks exactly like one my grandmother had. Same carved roses on the armrests, same faded blue cushion. It's probably just coincidence, but sitting in it makes me feel close to her again.
Are there other personal items left behind by previous occupants?
The house came furnished, which Miss Hartley said was part of the prize. But it's odd what's there. Children's toys in the nursery upstairs, still in good condition like someone just stepped away. There's a music box that plays lullabies, and baby clothes in the dresser drawers. Almost like the house was waiting.
Waiting for what?
Pause for me. For us. That's how it feels sometimes, like everything was arranged specifically for a pregnant woman. But that's probably just my imagination running wild.
Have you had any contact with neighbors? People who might know more about the house's history?
The nearest neighbors are a quarter-mile away, but I met Mrs. Chen at the grocery store in town. When I mentioned where I was, living, her whole demeanor changed. She got this worried look and started asking if I'd looked into the house's history, if I knew about the other families.
Other families?
She clammed up after that, said she'd probably said too much. But the way she looked at my belly before hurrying away. Pause, it reminded me of how people look at accident scenes, Tony. Like they're seeing something terrible that's about to happen.
How does that make you feel about staying there?
Conflicted. Part of me knows I should be grateful. I have a roof over my head, a place for the baby. But there's this undercurrent of wrongness I can't shake. Sometimes I wake up and find myself standing in rooms I don't remember walking to, like the house is calling me places.
That sounds deeply unsettling, Sarah.
The thing is, Tony, I don't have anywhere else to go. And despite everything strange about this place, despite the cold spots and the sounds and the way people in town look at me with pity, it's still shelter. When you've slept in your car for weeks, even a haunted mansion feels like a blessing.
Sarah, you mentioned that winning the mansion felt like a miracle at first. Can you walk me through that moment when you first realized something might be wrong?
It was the third night I'd been staying there. I had been so grateful, you know? Here I was, 6 months pregnant, sleeping in my car just days before, and suddenly I had this enormous house with actual beds and running water. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The baby was restless, kicking constantly, and I kept hearing these settling sounds from the old wood.
What kind of sounds exactly?
Creaking, mostly. But it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like footsteps pacing back and forth in the room above me. I kept telling myself it was just the house adjusting to having someone in it again after sitting empty for so long. Old houses do that, right?
They certainly can. But something made you investigate further.
I got up to use the bathroom around 2 in the morning, and I noticed there was a light on in what looked like an upstairs window. A warm, yellow glow, like from a lamp. But Tony, I hadn't been upstairs yet. I was still sleeping in the small bedroom off the kitchen because climbing those steep Victorian stairs seemed too risky with my pregnancy.
So you knew for certain that light shouldn't have been on.
Exactly. My first thought was that maybe there was some kind of electrical issue. Maybe old wiring was causing lights to flicker on and off. But when I looked out the window again 20 minutes later, the light was off. Then on again when I checked before going back to bed.
Did you go upstairs to investigate that night?
No, I was too scared. And honestly, too tired. Pregnancy exhaustion is real, and I'd been living on adrenaline for weeks before winning the house. I convinced myself I'd deal with it in the morning.
But morning brought its own revelations.
Long pause. That's when I found the newspaper clippings. I was exploring the kitchen more thoroughly, looking through the cabinets to see what previous owners might have left behind. Most of them were empty, but there was this one drawer that stuck. When I finally got it open, there was a manila folder tucked way in the back.
What was in the folder?
7 newspaper clippings, all from the local paper but spanning different years. The headlines were all similar. Local woman wins dream home in radio contest or lucky winner gets Victorian mansion. But here's what made my blood run cold, Tony. Each article had a follow-up clipping attached to it.
Follow-up stories about the winners?
Missing person reports. Every single one. The first woman, Rebecca Chen, won the house in 2010. 3 months later, there was a small article about her disappearance. Then Maria Gonzalez in 2012, same pattern. Then Jennifer Walsh, Amanda Foster, Lisa Kumar, Patricia Okonkwo, and most recently, Emma Thompson in 2019.
7 women, all contest winners, all disappeared.
All within 3 to 6 months of moving into the house. And Tony, when I looked at those photos more carefully, I realized something else. Every single one of these women was pregnant when they won.
Pause. How did you react to that discovery?
I actually laughed at first. It was so absurd, so impossible that my brain couldn't process it as real. I thought someone was playing an elaborate prank. Maybe there was a hidden camera somewhere and this was some sick reality show about scaring pregnant women.
But that feeling didn't last long.
No. Because as I sat there staring at those clippings, I started remembering details about the radio contest that hadn't seemed important before. The DJ who called me never mentioned the name of the station. He knew my full name, my address, even my due date, but I couldn't remember giving that information to anyone recently.
You said earlier that you never actually entered this contest.
Right. I listened to music on my phone, not the radio. I hadn't owned a working radio in years, but this man called my cell phone and said I'd won some kind of random drawing. He was so professional, had all these legal-sounding terms about property transfer and deed registration. When you're desperate and homeless, you don't question good fortune too closely.
So you started to piece together that this wasn't coincidence.
The more I thought about it, the more deliberate it all seemed. He had called me just 2 days after I'd been kicked out of my previous place. How did he know my timing so perfectly? How did he know I was pregnant? How did he get my phone number?
What was going through your mind as you processed all of this?
Pure terror. I remember putting my hands on my belly and feeling the baby moving. And suddenly this house didn't feel like salvation anymore. It felt like a trap. Every creak, every shadow, every room I hadn't explored yet felt potentially dangerous.
Did you consider leaving immediately?
Where would I go, Tony? I had $47 to my name and a car that barely ran. Winter was coming and I was 6 months pregnant with nowhere else to turn. Even if this house came with some kind of terrible history, at least it had heat and shelter and a roof that didn't leak.
So, you made the decision to stay and figure out what was happening.
I made the decision to stay and fight. Because whatever had happened to those 7 women, whatever was planned for me and my baby, I wasn't going to let it happen without understanding it first. Those women deserved better than just disappearing and being forgotten. And my child deserved a mother who was smart enough to beat whatever game was being played here.
That's when your real investigation began.
That's when everything changed. I wasn't just a grateful contest winner anymore. I was a woman who knew she was in danger, but finally had enough information to start fighting back.
So you're standing in this mansion, exhausted from your first night there, and you mentioned finding something that changed everything. What was it that broke this temporary peace you'd found?
Long pause. I was exploring the 2nd floor that morning, Tony. I'd barely slept because of the sounds in the walls, but I was determined to make the place work. I needed it to work.
What kind of sounds were keeping you awake?
Scratching, like fingernails on wood. I told myself it was mice or settling beams, anything normal. But when I found that room at the end of the hallway, I knew I'd been lying to myself.
Tell me about this room, Sarah.
It was locked, but the key was hanging right there on a hook beside the door. Like someone wanted me to find it. The room was set up as a nursery, Tony. A complete nursery with a crib, rocking chair, toys arranged perfectly on shelves.
That must have been unsettling given your condition.
Unsettling doesn't begin to cover it. The dust patterns showed everything had been recently moved, recently arranged. But here's what made my blood run cold. There was a manila envelope on the crib mattress with my name on it,
Your name was already there?
written in elegant script across the front. Sarah Martinez. Like they'd been expecting me specifically. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it.
What was inside that envelope, Sarah?
Photographs. 7 photographs of young women, all around my age, all visibly pregnant, and underneath each photo was a date and the words winner, Victorian Estate Contest.
The same contest you'd supposedly won.
Exactly. But Tony, I counted back through those dates. They went back 15 years, every 18 to 24 months, like clockwork. A new winner, a new pregnant woman.
How did you process that information in the moment?
I couldn't breathe. I sat in that rocking chair, staring at those faces, and I realized I was looking at a pattern. These women all looked similar. Dark hair, similar bone structure. We could have been sisters.
Did you recognize any of them?
The most recent photo was dated just 2 years before mine. Maria Santos. I'd heard about her disappearance on the news. Pregnant woman vanishes without a trace, police found no leads. But here was proof she'd been in this exact house.
What was your first instinct when you made that connection?
Run. Every instinct screamed at me to grab my backpack and run as fast as I could. But then I felt the baby move, Tony. This little flutter that reminded me I had nowhere else to go.
So you stayed despite the fear.
I turned over the photos, and that's when I found the notes. Each woman had written something on the back of their picture. Maria wrote, "They said the baby would be special. They said I was chosen."
What did the other notes say?
Similar things. The bloodline must continue. My child will fulfill the prophecy. I understand my purpose now. The handwriting changed from fear to acceptance as the dates got more recent.
That progression must have terrified you.
What terrified me most was the last photo, Tony. It was a Polaroid, newer than the others. A woman I didn't recognize, but the date on the back was impossible.
Why impossible?
It was dated 3 months in the future. 3 months from the day I was sitting in that nursery. And written on the back in the same elegant script as my name on the envelope was, Sarah Martinez, the chosen mother.
How did you react to seeing your own future predicted like that?
I dropped the photos and they scattered across the nursery floor. That's when I noticed something else, something that made everything worse. The crib wasn't empty, Tony. There was an indentation in the mattress, like something heavy had been lying there recently.
What do you think had been in that crib?
I didn't want to think about it. But as I gathered up those scattered photos, I noticed something in the background of each one. The same nursery, the same crib, the same toys arranged in exactly the same positions.
So this room had been used before.
For 15 years, Tony. Whatever was happening in that house had been happening for 15 years. And somehow I'd walked right into the middle of it, carrying exactly what they wanted.
Your unborn child.
Pause. That's when I heard the footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the nursery door. I wasn't alone in that house, Tony. I never had been.
Sarah, you mentioned that first night in the mansion was when everything began to shift for you. But I imagine the days that followed brought their own challenges. How did you begin to settle into this place that felt so foreign yet strangely familiar?
Long pause, Tony. That's exactly it. The settling part felt almost too easy, and that scared me more than anything. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell me it was all a mistake.
What did those early days look like? Were you still sleeping in that one room you'd claimed as safe?
For the first week, yes. I'd made this little nest in what I later learned was the morning room. It faced east, so I'd wake up with the sunrise streaming through those tall windows. The baby seemed to like it there too, less kicking, Pause, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched.
Watched by whom? Other people or something else entirely?
That's just it. I never saw anyone. But there were sounds. Footsteps upstairs when I was downstairs, doors closing when I knew I'd left them open. And the strangest thing was how the house seemed to anticipate what I needed.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, I was getting bigger, and sleeping on that makeshift bed was becoming impossible. My back ached constantly. One morning, I woke up, and there was this beautiful antique rocking chair in the corner, just sitting there like it had always belonged.
Had you seen it before in another room?
Tony, I had walked through every accessible room in that house multiple times. That chair was never there before. But here's the thing that really unsettled me. When I sat in it, it was the perfect height, the perfect angle for my back, almost like it had been made for someone exactly my size at exactly this stage of pregnancy.
How did that make you feel? Grateful or more suspicious?
Both. And that's when I realized I was changing in ways I hadn't expected. The old me, the girl who'd been living on the streets, would have taken that chair and run. Found a way to sell it, get some quick cash. But sitting there, feeling my baby move, I felt this overwhelming need to protect what we'd found.
Protection implies you sensed a threat. What form did you think that threat might take?
Pause. At first, I thought it was external. Maybe previous owners coming back to reclaim property. Maybe the radio station realizing they'd made an error. But as the days passed, I began to worry that the threat was me, that I was somehow going to ruin this gift we'd been given.
That sounds like you were struggling with feeling worthy of good fortune.
Exactly. I'd spent so long having nothing, being nothing, that abundance felt dangerous. I started having these dreams where I'd wake up back on the street and the mansion had just been a cruel hallucination brought on by hunger or exhaustion.
Did you share these fears with anyone? Make any connections outside the house during this time?
I was completely isolated, Tony. No phone, no internet, no way to reach the outside world without walking into town. And I was terrified to leave the property for too long, afraid that when I came back, the doors would be locked against me.
So, you were trapped, in a sense, even though you'd found shelter.
That's a perfect way to put it. Trapped by my own gratitude and fear. But it was during this period of isolation that I started to notice patterns in the house that couldn't be explained by coincidence or my imagination.
What kind of patterns?
The temperature, for one thing. The house was massive, and I had no way to heat it properly. But wherever I spent time, that room would become comfortable within hours. Not warm exactly, but the kind of comfortable that seeps into your bones.
And you're certain this wasn't just your body adjusting to the environment?
I tested it, Tony. I'd spend a morning in the library, and by noon it would be perfectly comfortable. Then I'd move to the conservatory, and within a few hours, same thing. Meanwhile, rooms I avoided stayed cold and unwelcoming.
It sounds like the house was responding to your presence in ways that defied logic.
Pause, yes. And that's when I started to wonder if the house needed me as much as I needed it. If maybe the previous winners hadn't disappeared. Maybe they'd been absorbed somehow. Maybe they'd become part of whatever was keeping that house alive.
That's a chilling thought, Sarah. Did that possibility make you consider leaving?
Long pause, Tony. By then, leaving wasn't really an option anymore. Not because I couldn't, but because I was starting to understand that my baby and I were connected to this place in ways I was only beginning to comprehend.
Sarah, when you first walked into that mansion, you mentioned feeling like something was watching you, but you stayed anyway. What made you push through that fear?
Long pause. You have to understand, Tony, I was desperate. When you're 7 months pregnant and sleeping in your car, even a haunted house feels like luxury. But it wasn't just desperation. There was something else. Something I couldn't name at the time.
Something else?
I kept having these dreams. Even before I won the mansion, back when I was staying at the shelter occasionally. Dreams about a woman in a white dress, standing at the top of a staircase. She never spoke, just stood there with her hand on her belly, like she was protecting something.
Did you recognize her?
Not then. But after I moved into the mansion, the dreams became more vivid, more urgent, and I started finding things.
What kind of things?
Voice softens a music box hidden behind a loose baseboard in what used to be a nursery. When I wound it up, it played the same lullaby my grandmother used to hum to me. A lullaby she said her mother taught her.
That must have been unsettling.
Unsettling doesn't begin to cover it. I was already on edge from learning about the other winners. 7 people, Tony. 7 people who just vanished. And here I was, the 8th, finding personal connections to a house I'd never seen before in my life.
How were you coping with all of this emotionally? The pregnancy, the isolation, these disturbing discoveries?
Pause. I wasn't coping well. I started talking to the baby more, like she was my only real companion. I'd sit in that nursery for hours, hand on my belly, telling her about everything I was finding. Crazy as it sounds, I felt like she was listening, really listening.
You say she. Did you know you were having a daughter?
I never had an ultrasound to confirm it, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. And I started calling her Elena. It just came to me one day, like someone whispered it in my ear.
Elena, that's a beautiful name.
It was my great-grandmother's name. Another connection I didn't understand then. My mother rarely talked about her family, said they were all gone. But Elena, I remembered that name from somewhere deep in my childhood.
So you're dealing with these mysterious connections, the disappearances, and you're completely alone. Did you consider leaving?
every day. But where would I go? Back to the streets? And there was something else keeping me there. I started feeling protective of the house, like it needed me as much as I needed it.
Protective how?
Hesitates. This is going to sound strange, but I began to sense that something bad was coming. Not from the house, but to the house. Like all these disappearances, all this tragedy, it wasn't random. Someone was orchestrating.
What gave you that impression?
Little things at first. A car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. Phone calls where no one spoke when I answered. And then I found the documents.
Documents?
Hidden in the basement, behind a false wall that I only discovered because I was looking for the source of a draft. Legal papers going back decades. Adoption records, birth certificates, property transfers, all involving young women who looked remarkably similar to me.
Similar how?
Same dark hair, same build, same age when they disappeared. But more than that, Tony, they all had the same last name before marriage or adoption, Martinez.
Your last name?
My last name. And they were all pregnant when they came to the house, all expecting daughters, all alone in the world just like me.
How did that discovery change things for you?
It changed everything. I realized I wasn't just some random contest winner. I wasn't even the first Sarah Martinez to live in that house. I was part of a pattern that went back generations. Someone had been watching my family, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances.
That must have been terrifying.
It was. But it was also clarifying. I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a target. And that meant I could fight back.
What was your first step?
I decided to learn everything I could about my family history, starting with that great-grandmother whose name my daughter somehow shared. If someone was hunting Martinez women, I needed to understand why.
And what did you discover?
Voice drops that Elena hadn't died peacefully in her sleep like my mother always claimed. She disappeared from that very mansion in 1952 along with her unborn daughter, just like the others.
Sarah, we've talked about the mansion's history, the missing winners, but I sense there's something more personal here. Something about your own past that connects to all this. Can you tell us about that?
Long pause, Tony. For the longest time I thought I was just unlucky. Born to a teenage mother who couldn't handle raising a child, bounced between foster homes, aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma, and a head full of questions about where I came from.
Those questions about your origins, did they become more pressing when you found yourself in a similar situation, pregnant and alone?
Absolutely. When I saw those 2 lines on that pregnancy test sitting in a gas station bathroom, the first thing I thought wasn't about the father who'd already disappeared or how I'd managed financially. It was about my own mother, what she must have felt, whether she ever regretted giving me up.
And now you were potentially facing similar choices.
Exactly. I kept wondering if I'd end up making the same mistakes, if this baby would grow up with the same emptiness I'd carried my whole life. Not knowing your history, your family, where you belong in the world. It's like being a tree without roots, Tony.
When you started investigating the mansion's records, what did you hope to find?
Initially, just some explanation for why I'd won a contest I never entered. But the deeper I dug into those property records, the more I realized I was looking for something else entirely. I was looking for patterns, for connections, for some sign that my life wasn't just a series of random misfortunes.
And what patterns emerged?
Rustling papers, the previous winners. 7 women before me, all between the ages of 19 and 25, all pregnant, all alone. But here's what really shook me, Tony. When I found the old newspaper clippings about their disappearances, I started recognizing faces.
Recognizing them how?
From dreams I'd been having since childhood. These vivid dreams about women in white dresses, walking through rooms with peeling wallpaper and broken mirrors. I always thought they were just nightmares, but seeing those faces in the newspaper archives, it was like my subconscious had been trying to tell me something for years.
That must have been terrifying to realize.
Terrifying, yes, but also strangely comforting. For the first time in my life, I felt connected to something larger than myself. These women, they weren't strangers. Somehow, we were linked, and I began to understand that maybe my whole life had been leading to this moment, to this mansion.
You mentioned earlier that you started having new dreams after moving into the mansion. Can you describe those?
The dreams became more specific, more detailed. I would see a woman, always the same woman, standing in what I now know was the mansion's nursery. She'd be holding a baby, singing this lullaby I'd never heard before but somehow knew all the words to.
Did you recognize this woman?
Not at first. But one night I dreamed I was standing behind her, and when she turned around. Pause, Tony. It was my own face, but older, much older. And the baby in her arms wasn't crying or fussing. It was perfectly still.
What do you think that dream was telling you?
I think it was showing me what the mansion wanted, what it had always wanted. Not just me, but what I carried, the baby. And I started to understand that all those women before me, they hadn't simply disappeared. They'd been chosen, just like I was chosen.
Chosen for what purpose?
That's where the family legacy comes in, Tony. After weeks of searching through records, I finally found what I was looking for. A birth certificate with my mother's name on it. Not as the mother, but as the baby.
Your mother was born in that mansion?
In 1975, yes. To a woman named Elena Martinez, who was part of some kind of residential program for unwed mothers. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. Elena Martinez was also listed as a contest winner in 1974. She won the mansion in a radio giveaway, just like I did.
So this pattern goes back generations.
At least 3 that I could document. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, who I never knew existed, and now me. Each of us pregnant, each of us desperate, each of us drawn to that mansion when we were most vulnerable.
What happened to your grandmother, Elena?
According to the records, she died in childbirth. Right there in the mansion, in what would have been the master bedroom. My mother was born, but Elena didn't survive, and somehow my mother ended up in the system, just like I did.
Did your mother ever know about this connection?
I don't think so. When I finally tracked down her last known address and went to see her, she was living in a care facility, early onset dementia. But when I mentioned the mansion's address, something flickered in her eyes. She grabbed my hand and said, "Don't go back there. The lady in white, she's still waiting."
The lady in white from your dreams?
The same one. And that's when I realized that my mother had been having the same dreams probably her whole life. The mansion had been calling to our family for decades, waiting for the right moment, the right combination of circumstances.
You're talking about this as if the mansion itself is alive, has intentions.
I know how it sounds, Tony. But when you're living in that house, when you feel the walls breathing around you, when you hear footsteps in the nursery at 3 a.m. and find the rocking chair moving by itself, you start to believe in things you never thought possible.
What changed for you emotionally when you made these discoveries about your family history?
Everything. For 22 years, I'd felt like I was floating through life without an anchor. Suddenly, I had not just a history, but a purpose, even if that purpose was terrifying. I wasn't just some random girl who got lucky in a contest. I was part of something that had been building for generations.
Did that knowledge make you feel more or less in control of your situation?
Less in control, but more significant. Does that make sense? Like my life finally had meaning, even if that meaning was potentially tragic. I started to understand that every choice my family had made, every abandonment, every struggle, had been leading to this moment.
And how did that realization affect your feelings about the pregnancy, about becoming a mother yourself?
Long pause, it made me determined, Tony. Determined to break the cycle. Whatever the mansion wanted, whatever had happened to the women before me, I was going to fight it. Not just for myself, but for my baby. And for all the mothers who came before me who never got the chance to fight back.
So you decided to stay, to confront whatever was happening rather than run.
I decided to finish what my grandmother and great-grandmother couldn't. To finally understand what the mansion wanted and find a way to end it. Because I realized that running wouldn't work. The dreams, the calling, they'd follow me wherever I went. The only way out was through.
Sarah, when you found those newspaper clippings about the other winners, what went through your mind? I imagine that must have shattered any remaining hope that this was simply good fortune.
Long pause. You know, Tony, I think part of me had been preparing for that moment ever since I walked through those doors. The relief I felt wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Does that make sense? Like when you've been hearing strange noises in your house for weeks, and you finally find the broken pipe. The problem is worse than you hoped, but at least you're not going crazy.
That's a remarkable way to put it. So you felt relief even as you discovered you were potentially in mortal danger?
The not knowing was eating me alive. Here I was, 7 months pregnant, living in this beautiful prison, and every day I'd wake up wondering if today would be the day something terrible happened. Finding those articles, it gave me something concrete to fight against.
Tell me about what you learned from those clippings. What pattern did you see?
Each winner had been a young woman. Each had been in some kind of desperate situation, homeless, fleeing an abusive relationship, drowning in debt. And each had disappeared exactly 3 weeks after moving into the mansion. 3 weeks, Tony, to the day.
And how much time had passed since you'd moved in?
18 days. Pause. I remember sitting on that dusty floor in the basement, counting on my fingers like a child. 18 days. Which meant I had 5 days to figure out what happened to them, or I'd become the 8th name in someone's collection.
What struck you most about these women, beyond the obvious pattern?
Their faces, honestly. I spent hours staring at their photographs in those old newspapers. They all had this look, hopeful but haunted, like they'd been given a gift they couldn't quite believe in. I recognized that look because I'd seen it in my own mirror every morning since arriving at the mansion.
You mentioned earlier that you'd started feeling a connection to the mansion that seemed to go beyond gratitude. Did learning about these other women change that feeling?
It complicated everything. Pause, the mansion still felt like home in a way that terrified me. Even knowing what I knew, even seeing those faces of missing women, I'd catch myself running my hand along the banister with genuine affection. It was like being in love with someone you know is dangerous.
That's a powerful comparison. Did you consider leaving immediately?
Of course. I packed a bag 3 different times that first night after finding the articles. But Tony, where was I going to go? I was 7 months pregnant, I had maybe $40 to my name, and winter was coming. The streets that had seemed impossible before I came to the mansion hadn't become any more welcoming.
So you felt trapped by the very circumstances that had made winning the mansion seem like salvation.
Exactly. And I think whoever orchestrated this knew that. They didn't just pick desperate women randomly. They picked women who would have no choice but to stay, even after discovering the danger. It was diabolical, really. Brilliant and diabolical.
When you say whoever orchestrated this, you'd move beyond thinking this was coincidence.
Absolutely. 7 women don't just happen to win a contest they never entered, Tony. 7 women don't just happen to disappear on the same timeline. Someone was pulling strings, and they'd been doing it for years.
Did you find any clues about who might be behind it?
Not yet. But I started paying attention to different things. The phone calls that came for previous tenants, the way certain rooms felt colder than others, the fact that there was always fresh milk in the refrigerator, even though I never bought any.
Fresh milk?
Every few days, I'd find groceries I hadn't purchased. Nothing extravagant. Milk, bread, basic prenatal vitamins. At first, I thought maybe it was part of the contest prize. But after finding those articles, it felt more like maintenance, like someone was making sure their investment stayed healthy.
That's chilling. You're describing being cared for like livestock.
That's exactly what it felt like. And the most disturbing part, I was so hungry, so desperate, that I kept eating the food anyway, even knowing it might be part of whatever plan was unfolding around me.
What did those 5 remaining days feel like, knowing you were on this timeline?
Like living inside a countdown clock. Every morning felt like borrowed time, but also, strangely, it gave me focus. I stopped wandering around the mansion like a grateful guest and started moving through it like an investigator. If I was going to disappear like the others, I was damn well going to understand why first.
Sarah, you mentioned finding documents in that hidden room. What exactly did you discover in those papers?
Long pause. Tony, this is the part that still gives me chills. The documents weren't just random records. They were birth certificates, adoption papers, medical files, all connected to something called the Meridian Foundation.
The Meridian Foundation. That name hasn't come up before in our conversation.
Because I didn't understand what it meant until I found those papers. Tony, every single one of the previous winners, all 7 women who disappeared, they were all adopted, just like me.
All adopted. That's quite a coincidence.
That's what I thought at first. But then I kept reading. The foundation wasn't just any adoption agency. It was specifically designed to place children with families, then track them throughout their lives. Track them, Tony.
Track them for what purpose?
Voice trembling slightly. The papers talked about bloodlines, genetic markers, something about preserving certain family traits through selective breeding programs that span generations.
Sarah, are you saying this foundation was involved in some kind of eugenics program?
Worse than that. The Blackwood family, the original owners of the mansion, they founded Meridian in the 1920s. But they didn't just disappear in 1987 like everyone thought. They've been operating behind the scenes for decades, using the foundation to identify and monitor specific genetic lines.
And you believe you're part of one of these lines?
I know I am. There was a file with my name on it, Tony. Not just my adopted name, but my birth name too. Names I'd never seen before. The file went back 3 generations, tracking my maternal line through the adoption system.
What did this tracking involve exactly?
Medical records, psychological evaluations, even photographs taken without consent. They documented everything about the families who adopted us, our education, our relationships, our health. But here's the truly terrifying part. The files showed they were waiting for something specific.
Waiting for what?
For us to become pregnant. Every single woman was monitored until she conceived her first child. Then they were brought to the mansion through these fake contests or inheritance claims.
The radio contest you never entered.
Exactly. I found the real contest documentation, Tony. It was never a random drawing. They selected me specifically because I was 22, pregnant, and homeless, vulnerable and desperate enough to accept what seemed like a miracle.
But why? What was the ultimate purpose of bringing these women to the mansion?
Voice barely above a whisper, the children, Tony. They weren't interested in the mothers at all. The genetic tracking, the monitoring, the luring them to the mansion when they were pregnant. It was all about harvesting the next generation.
Harvesting. That's a chilling word choice, Sarah.
I found medical equipment in the basement. Not old equipment from the mansion's original era, but modern surgical instruments. Clean rooms that looked like they'd been recently used. And there were nursery rooms, Tony. Empty cribs with charts and monitoring equipment.
Are you suggesting they were taking the babies?
The files were very clear about the process. The women would be kept at the mansion until they gave birth. The children would be taken for what they called genetic preservation and enhancement. The mothers would then disappear.
How do you know the mothers disappeared? What proof did you find?
Death certificates. All 7 previous winners were declared dead within weeks of arriving at the mansion. Natural causes according to the paperwork. Complications from childbirth. But the babies, Tony, there were no death certificates for any babies.
So these children are still alive somewhere?
Being raised by the foundation, I assume. Probably told their mothers died in childbirth. The cycle continues, Tony. They grow up, have children of their own, and the foundation keeps tracking the bloodlines.
Sarah, this sounds like something out of a conspiracy thriller. How did you verify this information?
I photographed everything. Every document, every file, every piece of evidence. But more than that, I found something that proved they were actively monitoring me even before the contest.
What kind of proof?
Photos of me, Tony. Recent photos taken outside my job, at the homeless shelter, even at the clinic where I found out I was pregnant. They'd been watching me for months, waiting for the right moment to spring their trap.
When you realized all this, what went through your mind?
Pure terror. I understood that I hadn't won anything at all. I'd been selected, lured to that mansion like every woman before me. And if I stayed, my baby and I would become the latest victims in a program that had been running for nearly a century.
Sarah, you mentioned finding documents in the basement. What exactly did those papers reveal?
Long pause, that's when everything changed, Tony. I found birth certificates, medical records, adoption papers, all dated from the 1970s and 80s.
Adoption papers?
7 sets of them. All for babies born in that mansion, all given to the same adoption agency. An agency that Dr. Whitmore ran before he became the town doctor.
The same Dr. Whitmore who'd been tracking the previous winners?
The very same. But here's what made my blood run cold, Tony. I found my own mother's birth certificate in that pile. She was born in that house in 1978.
Your mother was born there?
She was one of those adopted babies, which means the mansion wasn't randomly given to me at all. Someone knew exactly who I was, knew my family connection to that place.
So the radio contest was staged?
Completely fabricated. I called the station later and they had no record of any contest. Someone had been watching, waiting for the right moment. They knew I was pregnant, knew I was desperate.
But why bring you back there, Sarah? What was the purpose?
Voice trembling. The medical records showed something else. All those babies born in the mansion, they weren't just random births. They were part of some kind of experiment. Dr. Whitmore was documenting genetic traits, family histories, behavioral patterns.
An experiment spanning generations.
3 generations, Tony. My grandmother, my mother, and now me. We were all part of his research. The other 7 winners, they were connected too. Daughters and granddaughters of those original babies.
And your unborn child would have been the 4th generation.
Exactly. That's why I had to be pregnant when I arrived. That's why the timing was so precise. Dr. Whitmore is 93 years old, Tony. This was his final collection.
Collection?
He wasn't just studying us, he was harvesting genetic material. The basement had a medical facility hidden behind false walls. Examination tables, surgical equipment, specimen storage.
The previous winners didn't just disappear.
They were used, Tony. Used to continue whatever twisted research he started decades ago. And I was supposed to be number 8.
Sarah, you mentioned finding Eleanor's journal and learning about the pattern. What was going through your mind as you realized the true scope of what you were facing?
Pause terror, honestly, Tony. But also this strange clarity. I remember sitting there in that dusty library, my hand on my belly, feeling my daughter move. 7 women before me, all pregnant, all lured to that mansion, all gone.
That must have been overwhelming. How did you find the strength to keep going instead of just running?
I thought about running. God knows I wanted to. But where would I go? I was homeless, pregnant, and whoever orchestrated this had found me once already. They'd find me again.
So, you decided to stay and fight. What was your plan?
Soft laugh plan might be generous. I knew I had maybe days before they made their move. The journal showed the pattern. Each woman disappeared during their 7th month. I was already 6.5 months along.
What resources did you have? You were essentially trapped in that mansion.
I had Eleanor's journal, her research about the mansion's history. She'd figured out so much before they silenced her. And I had something they didn't expect. I wasn't alone anymore.
You mean Detective Morrison?
Marcus had started believing me, yes. But I also mean my daughter. I know it sounds strange, Tony, but I could feel her strength. This little life inside me, fighting to exist. She gave me purpose beyond just survival.
How did you prepare for what you knew was coming?
I mapped every room, every hidden passage Eleanor had discovered. I found the old servants' quarters, places where I could hide. I gathered supplies, food, water, anything I might need.
Were you afraid?
Pause, terrified. But also angry, Tony. Really angry for the first time in my life. These people, this family, they'd been hunting women like me for generations, taking our children for their twisted legacy.
That anger sounds like it became fuel for you.
It did. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as the one who could finally break their cycle. 7 women had died, but I was going to be different.
What made you believe you could succeed where others hadn't?
Quiet confidence, because I finally understood something, Tony. They needed me alive long enough to give birth. That was my advantage. They couldn't just kill me outright, they had to wait, and waiting gave me time to turn their own trap against them.
Sarah, you mentioned earlier that you felt like everything was leading to a final confrontation. Can you walk me through those last moments before you decided to face whatever was waiting for you?
Long pause. I remember standing in that nursery, Tony, holding the birth certificate with my grandmother's name on it. My baby was moving constantly, like she could sense what was coming. I realized I had 2 choices: run and spend my life looking over my shoulder, or stay and end this cycle once and for all.
That must have been an incredibly difficult decision to make, especially being so close to your due date. What convinced you to stay?
The other women, Tony. I kept thinking about those 7 women who came before me. They all ran, and they all disappeared anyway. Elena Vasquez, the first winner back in 1987. She had a daughter, too. They found her car by the river, but never found her or the baby. I couldn't let that be my story.
So you made the decision to confront whatever force was behind all this. How did you prepare yourself mentally for what might happen? What did the journal reveal about breaking this pattern?
That the mansion wasn't just trapping us, Tony. It was waiting. Waiting for the right generation, the right moment. My grandmother wrote that every 7 years it grows stronger, but there's also a window when it's vulnerable. During the birth of a 7th-generation daughter.
And you were carrying that 7th-generation daughter.
Exactly. The entity needed my baby to complete some kind of ritual, but that same birth would also be its weakness. My grandmother never got the chance to use that knowledge, but she left me everything I needed to finish what she started.
How did you find the courage to face something so dangerous while pregnant and alone?
I wasn't alone, Tony. I could feel my grandmother with me, and all those women who came before. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even when everything looks impossible.
And you were ready to fight for your daughter's future.
I was ready to end this, once and for all.
Sarah, you're standing in that mansion's parlor, holding evidence that connects your family to all those disappearances. What's going through your mind in that moment?
Terror, Tony. Pure terror. because I finally understood why I was chosen. My grandmother Elena wasn't just another winner who disappeared in 1987. She was the caretaker's daughter, the one who escaped.
Escaped from what exactly?
The Blackwood family ritual. Every generation, they needed a pregnant woman from Elena's bloodline. Something about continuing their legacy through our children. My grandmother broke the cycle when she ran away, but they'd been hunting our family ever since.
And you realized your baby was what they were really after.
Voice breaking, yes. The radio contest, the convenient timing, even my pregnancy itself. None of it was coincidence. They'd orchestrated everything to bring me back to finish what my grandmother had interrupted decades ago.
How did you piece together the connection between the other missing women and your family?
The photographs in the basement. 7 women, all pregnant, all bearing some resemblance to my grandmother. But Tony, they weren't random winners. They were practice runs. The Blackwoods were perfecting their ritual, waiting for someone from Elena's direct line.
What was your first instinct when you understood the truth?
Run. Just like my grandmother did. But then I heard footsteps upstairs, and I knew they were already there. Waiting for me to discover everything, to understand my purpose before they completed their ceremony.
You mentioned earlier that your grandmother left you clues. What kind of clues?
Her journal, hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall. She'd returned to the mansion once, years after escaping, to document everything she remembered about the ritual. She knew someday they'd come for her descendants.
And in that moment, reading her words, what did you decide?
That I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. My grandmother spent her whole life running and hiding, never feeling safe. I was going to end this cycle, not continue it.
Even though you were outnumbered and trapped.
Especially because of that, Tony. I had something they didn't expect. I had Elena's knowledge of their weaknesses, their dependencies on specific timing and location. And I had something worth fighting for.
Your child.
My child. And every future generation that deserved to live free from this curse.
So you're standing there, face to face with Eleanor's descendant. What went through your mind, Sarah?
Everything clicked into place. The contests, the disappearances, why I felt so connected to that house. She wasn't just continuing Eleanor's work. She was Eleanor's great-granddaughter.
And she wanted your baby because?
The bloodline. My great-great-grandmother had been Eleanor's midwife, the one who helped deliver all those babies that Eleanor. She believed our families were bound together across generations.
How did you get out of there?
I didn't fight her, Tony. I talked to her. I saw this broken woman who'd lost her own child years ago, who'd convinced herself this twisted legacy was her purpose.
You showed her compassion?
I told her about my baby's kicks, about choosing hope over fear. Something in her just broke. She started crying and said she couldn't become the monster Eleanor was.
She let you go.
She called the police herself.
So Sarah, sitting here now with your daughter healthy and happy, what do you think the mansion was really about?
Pause. I think it was Margaret's way of finding peace, Tony. She'd been trapped there for so long, watching her own story repeat with each young woman who came before me.
The previous 7 winners.
They weren't random, we all carried something she recognized. But I was the first one strong enough to break the cycle, instead of becoming part of it.
What changed you the most through this experience?
Learning that running from the past only gives it more power. Margaret taught me that. She'd been running from her guilt for over a century.
And now?
Now I understand that some gifts come wrapped in terror, but they're still gifts. The mansion gave me more than shelter, Tony. It gave me the strength to face whatever comes next.
Any regrets about entering that contest you never entered?
Soft laugh, not a single one.
So Sarah, 6 months later, how has your life changed since uncovering the truth about the mansion and your family's history?
Gentle laugh. Everything's different, Tony. My daughter Emma is healthy, and we're living in the cottage on the estate grounds now. The mansion itself will be converted into a center for homeless families.
That seems fitting given what you experienced. What about the investigation into the previous disappearances?
The authorities found evidence linking Dr. Whitmore's descendants to all 7 cases. They're facing charges now. Those families finally have answers.
And personally, Sarah? How has this journey affected you as a person, as a mother?
I've learned that sometimes the most terrifying situations can lead to the greatest transformations. I went from being a frightened homeless girl to someone who understands her worth, her heritage.
Any lingering fears about what you discovered?
The truth, however dark, was liberating. Emma will grow up knowing her history, both the painful parts and the triumphant ones. That's healing.